In today's video, I'm going to show you step by step how to do focus stacking inside of Photoshop. I'll begin inside of Lightroom, we'll do some basic edits, we'll go into Photoshop for the actual blending of the images, and then we'll move back into Lightroom to do some final touches to the photo. Let's go ahead and get started. Here I have 30 frames of a very small mushroom that I photographed out here in Oregon. And if I click on one of them and kind of scroll through it slowly, you can see how the focus kind of moves from the front to the back. It doesn't go all the way to the back, but it goes pretty far. Now, to create this series of photos, I have a setting on my Fujifilm camera that allows me to auto focus bracket my photos. So just real quickly, if you happen to be using a Fujifilm camera that supports this type of shooting, if you want to get to it, I'm using an X-T3 here, you go into the shooting setting and then into the drive setting. Then you go into bracket setting, scroll down to focus bracket, then you choose how many frames you want, then you choose the step setting, and what it is it's basically the amount of distance that the focus changes between each photo. And then with interval, you can set a certain amount of seconds in between each shot if you want there to be some time between each frame. When I do this type of focus stacking, I usually just keep it at 0. And you can see here in this really quick video, you can see what happens when I press the shutter. The camera just auto-focuses for however many frames I have set all the way through. And it goes pretty quickly too. And you do need an autofocus lens for this to work. So back inside of Lightroom, one of the first things that I need to do here is I need to make sure that all of these photos are edited the same way before I bring them into Photoshop, because I'm almost always going to do some type of raw editing to my photos. And the way I like to do that in Lightroom is to use Auto Sync. So I'm going to go to Grid View. I have that first image selected. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, hold that Shift key, and then click on that last image, and now all of my photos are selected. Then I'm just going to select one of these photos kind of in the middle to get a good middle ground focus point, so I'm not too far to the extreme with the focus setting. And then I'll press D. So the one change you may have to make if you're doing this on your own is down at the bottom of the panel on the right. You want to make sure that you have this toggled. It's probably going to say sync. You want to make sure that it's toggled up to say auto sync. So now whatever changes I make to this one photo, it's going to apply to any other image that I have selected, and you can see that down there in that film strip view. And just real quickly, I'll show you kind of an extreme setting of this. So if I were to bring the exposure all the way or really far to the right, it's going to sync that setting across all of those photos on the bottom. Now I don't obviously want it to be this bright, so I'm just going to double click that exposure there to bring everything back to normal. Now I'm ready to make some edits. So I'll play around with my white balance. It doesn't look like it needs anything too intense. I increased the warmth setting a little bit, and I may decrease that tint to kind of balance things out. Now down in the tone, I'm going to increase my exposure just a tad, increase that contrast a little bit. I'm also going to increase the shadows to bring out some of that detail in those darker areas. Let's see, with whites, maybe boost the overall brightness a little bit with that whites. And then I'm also going to increase the dehaze slider, but just a tiny bit. Now I'm going to toggle my before and after and see how that looks. I'm going to go back up to my tint slider, I think, and bring that back up a notch. Just a little bit. And I think that's looking good. It's just a very subtle edit. But the most important thing is that all of my photos are edited the exact same way. Okay, so I'm going to press G to go back to Grid View, and now I'm ready to bring these photos into Photoshop. And the first step is to bring all of the images into Photoshop and have them all in the Layers panel. So to do that, I'm going to go up to Photo, Edit in, Open as Layers in Photoshop. Now this step may take some time. It just really depends on how many photos you are trying to merge, their resolution, and also your computer processing speed. So you may just have to start this process, do something else, leave the room, come back when it's finished. All right, so Photoshop has finished bringing all of those files in, and you can look over on the right and see that I now have those 30 files over in the Layers panel. Now it's time to blend all of these layers together. So I have that top layer selected. I'm going to scroll down, hold the Shift key, and then click on that bottom layer. Next, I'll go up to Edit, Auto Blend Layers. I'm going to choose Stack Images. I can keep that seamless tones and colors checked, and I don't need Content Aware Fill because that's something you'd probably use more with like a panorama, for example. All right, I'll go ahead and click OK. Again, I'm just going to let Photoshop run. It may take a few minutes, and usually this is the part that takes a little bit longer. Okay, Photoshop has finished all of its blending. And if you look over in the Layers panel, you can see a whole bunch of masks are now added to each of those layers. The very bottom layer looks like it has the majority of the background included. And then the rest of them just kind of go through and, you could look at each of them if you wanted to. They are all very, very strangely created, but that's kind of the magic of Photoshop. It's able to just do all of that for us. Let's go ahead and zoom in and see how everything looks. So I'm just going to zoom in to 100%, and I'm using that hand tool to kind of move through the image. Overall, the merge looks really good. It blended those layers quite well. And now there is kind of a jarring transition between the in focus area and the out of focus area. And that's only because when I actually created the frames, I didn't continue through to the very back side of the mushroom. And I'd probably do it differently if I were photographing this again. It probably would have only been maybe 15 frames. I may have had to add another 30 to get the entire mushroom in focus. Okay, so everything here looks pretty good. The blend looks good, but there are some things I would like to edit, and specifically this white blob here at the bottom. There's just something in the foreground there that doesn't look good. And as we know with composition, the brighter areas tend to draw the eye. And so this kind of white blob is really the brightest thing in the frame, and so I need to remove it. So I'm going to go to the very top layer, I'm going to click on it to activate it, and I want to create a new stamped layer. So I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, Command-Option-Shift-E, and on a PC that's going to be Control-Alt-Shift-E, and that just created a merged layer of all of those macro images, and it created it and it put it right on top of the Layers panel. Next, I'm going to use the Clone Stamp tool, but I don't like to do that on the original layer. So I'm going to add a new blank layer. So I'll click that in the Layers panel, and I'm going to press S to make sure I have that stamp active. At the top, I'm going to make sure that I have Current and Below selected. That will ensure that anything I do on the blank layer will actually pull from the layer below it. Next, I'm going to go down to my image. I'm going to hold that Option key and click over the branch area, which basically just samples that area of the image. Then I'm going to move over to the right and make sure that that branch is connected there with the existing image. And then I'm just going to click and kind of copy that part of the image over that white area. Next, I'm going to do some masking to this stamped layer that I just created. So I'm going to click on the mask icon in the Layers panel. I'm going to press B to make sure I have the brush active. Up at the top, I'm going to make sure that the opacity is set to 50% and that I'm painting with black. Then I'm just going to brush over this kind of green area because I do want to bring back those little buds there. I don't mind if a little bit of that white comes through. So let's just toggle that layer on and off and see how that changed. I think I'm going to see what happens if I remove this little spot over here as well. And I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so I'm finished editing the photo and I'm almost ready to bring it back into Lightroom. But one problem that happens when you create files like this is that the file size, if I were to save this, the file size would be enormous and way too big for anything that I really need to keep. So this goes against a lot of what I do personally and a lot of what I teach, is I'm actually going to tell you to delete those layers, those raw file focus stacking layers. Now, it's obviously a completely optional step. You can save those layers intact if you want to. I personally like to delete them just because the file sizes get way too big. So I'm going to click on that top focus stacked image, scroll all the way to the bottom, hold the shift key, select the bottom image, and then delete those layers. Now, because I created that merged layer, I still have the actual image, the completely merged file intact. Okay, now I'm free to go ahead and save this file and bring it back into Lightroom. So once the file is saved, it opens up back into Lightroom. And let's just go ahead and I'm just going to click on another one of these files here so we can kind of see the before and after difference. So that's one of the photos before the merge, and then this is the final merge. So you can see a lot of that focus kind of came back to the top part of the mushroom. All right, I'm going to deselect those and just make sure I have that final focus stacked image active. Now I'm going to do some edits to this to add a little bit of stylization here inside of Lightroom. So I have that photo active. I'm going to press D. That'll take me to the Develop module. And I'm going to start off by adding a profile. So I'm going to click on that profile browser. And I'm going to go down to some of my own profiles that I've created. If you like what you see here, this is a pack, the Nicole Z Contempo pack. These are free on my website. It requires an email sign up, and that's it. I'll go ahead and link that in the description. So I'm going to click to activate the Contempo 1. And I'm just going to play around with that slider at the top and kind of decide how moody I want it to go. Maybe I'll go a little bit moody with this image, so I'll keep it almost right at 100%. I have it at 104 there, and I'll click Close. Next, I can play with, maybe I'll add a little bit of warmth to the image with that temperature slider. I'm going to go down to the tone curve, add a very subtle S curve. And I'm also going to add a vignette. So in the effects panel, I'm going to reduce the amount slider. I'm going to increase the midpoint. I'm also going to increase the feather. And then lastly, I'll go into that detail panel and I'm going to add some sharpening. So I'm going to start out just by increasing that sharpening slider. Next, I'm going to go into masking. And if I press and hold the Option or Alt key and I move that masking slider to the right, I can see the areas that are actually being affected by the sharpening slider. So anything that is white is actually being sharpened and anything that's black is being ignored because you don't want to sharpen those out of focus areas. So let's go ahead and zoom in. And then if I toggle that detail on and off, it's adding just a nice little bit of crispness to that file. Okay, so that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that this video helped you with your own focus stacking endeavors.